Will the Migrant Army currently assembling in many nations unleash the next wave of Bible prophecies? Well, that would mean that the current migrant issue is found in Bible prophecy, and yes, likely it is, even if your church and favorite Bible teachers aren't discussing it. That means it's more than just a political issue to gain a couple votes for one party or another, and more than a humanitarian issue, but instead, it's setting up the fulfillment of several crucial Bible prophecies. So I'm sure your mind is whirling right now at this point. That would mean that someone or something more than some national level politicians are behind this. Maybe those behind the establishment of a totalitarian one world governance system, and perhaps at an even higher level, the Antichrist seeding his followers into nations that have Christian majorities, so he can strike back at those nations. The army has already been active. Ronald Da Silva was in his driveway with a friend on April 27th when he was gunned down by a migrant who had already been deported. Shaylee Estes was killed on July 24th by a migrant who broke into her house and fatally shot her. Stories like this happen all the time and are just the beginning. Potential violence is much more important to those behind this than potential voters or jobs. Let me say that again. Violence is the goal, not votes. It just isn't unleashed yet. So in this teaching, we're going to look at what Bible prophecy says these migrants might do, how they will likely unleash the rest of Bible prophecy, how they're related to the rest of it, and what you as a Christian should do about this. Craig Campbell of our video team helped research this video and helped produce it. So a double shout out to him. This is Bible teacher Nelson Walters. And that's how this channel works. A community all sharing what they know so we're prepared to overcome the end times. So let me ask you a question. Are you worried about this migrant army? According to the Associated Press, 33% of Americans are. Fearful of violence and fearful they're losing their nation to the influence and votes this influx of migrants has caused. 56% of migrants are male. Half of them are military age. So about 28% of all migrants are military age males. When you realize that 15 million migrants will have entered the USA during the Biden administration, that means an army of 4 million men will potentially have entered the USA alone. Now, not all of them are incentivized to harm people, but out of that vast multitude, the number who are so incentivized is really substantial. Films have surfaced on the internet of military-aged Chinese men in the USA, and the influence of all the migrants are also impactful in other nations that they enter. For instance, in Europe, the vast majority of migrants have been Islamic. Muslims made up 5% of Europe's population in 2016 and will be 20% by 2050. An army is forming within the homeland where battles haven't been fought since the Civil War. Now, before we get to where this is headed biblically and give specific prophecies, let's talk a bit about a Christian's biblical responsibility to this army. You know, pray for your enemies and go and make disciples of all people groups. Yeah. And you know, that doesn't get talked about enough. Back in 2016, in my hometown of Wilmington, North Carolina, we were targeted as a landing spot for a wave of incoming migrants. My house church mobilized with other churches, small and large, to care and evangelize this group. We went through several training sessions on how to best approach them and care for them, only to have the U.S. government reprioritize other towns as landing spots for migrants. I think what we're seeing in the last 2 or 3 years actually goes all the way back to 2016, and my town is smaller, so I think they wanted the migrants in the cities where they could have more impact. I think it goes all the way back to the Trump administration, so don't think this is a one-party problem. Now, Craig Campbell from our video team is right in the thick of things out in Colorado, though, volunteering for a group called Crossfire Ministries, whose food pantries and clothing distribution is being taxed by the vast increase in young, military-age men looking for handouts. Craig asked me directly, quote, "We are more than willing to help locals with their support needs, but we're both struggling with providing handouts for military-age males from countries that are committed to the destruction of our country and our faith. We're praying for guidance. I would think others in the Nelson Walters community may need biblical guidance as well." End of quote. And that's what this video is all about. So, if you care what God wants you to do about this issue, should you be protecting your homeland or should you be helping these people? Watch the whole thing. Now, before we finish up this teaching with that guidance, let's look at where this army fits into prophecy, because it's very important. Jesus had this to say about the beginning of birth pangs in Matthew 24:7. "For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places." You probably know the verse. The Greek word for nation here is ethnos, which more properly means people group. So ethnic groups are going to rise against other ethnic groups. What do you do if a nation is somewhat homogeneous and you're a bad guy? Well, you import people groups into that nation. Does this explain what we see in Europe and the USA? Yes, in our opinion, it does. In Revelation, we believe this is describing the events of the sixth seal and the red horse rider. And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth so that people should slay one another. And he was given a great sword. Revelation 6:4. We think this passage and the Matthew 24:7 passage are discussing the same two things. In order to take peace from the earth, what happens during the breaking of the seal must impact the whole world. Even World War II didn't take peace from the whole world. It only took peace from portions of it. But if you seed an army into all the nations, you can achieve this taking away of peace. So who's doing the seeding? If you look at who's supporting this on a global level, you see some very familiar names. The World Bank, the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, and the European Union. What do they have to gain? Well, nothing more than power, world domination, and total control of every human on the planet. So, is this army originally going to do their bidding? Yes, I believe they're going to be activated at exactly the right moment for maximum impact. But the globalist powers aren't the only ones who will use the army. We know around the midpoint of the tribulation, someone else that Revelation calls the beast is going to revolt against the globalist government of Mystery Babylon. We see this in Revelation 17:16. And he's going to burn it, at least its capital city, with fire. Then the army's going to belong to the beast. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them, and authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and ethnos. Revelation 13:7. So the beast is going to be given authority over all the tribes and peoples and languages, over every people group. This means he will have forces loyal to him in every nation. He's going to make war with the saints and conquer them. And if he's going to do that, he needs a coordinated force everywhere, because Christians are everywhere after all. So it appears to me that this diverse army that's now being seeded into the nations will eventually obey the Antichrist. First, they're going to obey the globalists and then switch allegiance and obey the Antichrist. When is this going to happen, you might ask? Let's see how this might play out in the scope of biblical timetables. If this army first rises at the second seal, then logically the first seal must come first. We have demonstrated that the first seal is likely the covenant with the many that launches the 70th week of Daniel. We have also shown in other videos that we suspect this may be signed at the upcoming Summit for the Future of the UN in late September 24, when all nations surrender their sovereignty to the United Nations. After the first seal, then comes the second. So sometime after that, we're guessing maybe 2025, the powers that control the UN and the World Economic Forum are going to order their Migrant Army to activate. The Bible tells us this will take peace from the whole earth. And to the rescue will come the United Nations, riding in on its literal white horse, the white horse of the first seal, to put down the rebellion after an appropriate length of time is allowed, so people are so frightened that they will gladly accept totalitarian control to prevent this from ever happening in the future again. This government is called Mystery Babylon in the Bible, and it sits on all the nations and controls them. Sits on all of them, including the beast. Well, he doesn't like to be sat on. So he revolts at the midpoint, and this army that's still in all the nations rises up to obey him. That's how we see all this going down. So let's circle back to what Christians should do about all this. One thing, an important thing, is to accept the will of God. Jesus said in regard to what was to come upon the earth, do not be terrified. These are the things that must take place in Matthew 24:6. He is saying, have hope. I got this. So hope is the number one thing all of us must have in this situation. Hope in Jesus, not in our nations or our communities. They will fall, first to Mystery Babylon and then to the Antichrist, but Jesus is going to defeat them both. Look at what it says in Romans. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink, for by doing so you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Romans 12:19-21. So there's our answer. There's our marching orders. Maybe not the answer you wanted to hear, I know that. But Jesus' way to overcome evil is with good. He went to the cross after all. He didn't send down legions of angels. And by the way, if you didn't know it, verse 21 that we just quoted, overcome evil with good, is the tagline verse of Last Days Overcomers. So we're now entering the last days. If you understand that and you believe it and you know it, our entire focus needs to be on building Jesus' kingdom. In this world, Jesus works through his true believers who use the tools of faith, hope, and love, not tools like AK-47s. And we realize this is the exact opposite of what the world teaches. And that is why Jesus explained that in the last days, the love of most would grow cold. And it already is. But imagine how much more when churchgoers see their homes, neighborhoods, and nations falling to evil powers. The temptation to strike back is just going to be very great. So, resign your mind, first and foremost, to the fact that our home is not this world, and the bodies we live in will not be the bodies that you're looking at right now in the mirror. We're getting new ones, folks. Now, that might be a major element of why God gives us these prophecies in the first place, so that we aren't wasting our efforts on defending our nations or our lives. Rather, it's focusing on what we know to be true. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, after all. We know in short time we will be with Jesus and he will be ruling the world. If we focus on those two things, then we're going to find obeying Romans 12 to be a whole lot easier. Because Jesus is going to undo the Great Reset. No matter what the globalists throw at us or what the Antichrist does, Jesus is going to win. Click right here to discover how, if we had obeyed the Jubilee system God decreed in the first place, the Great Reset would never have happened. And in that video, you're going to see how Jesus is going to use the disobedience of the globalists against themselves very shortly, and it was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.